Are you on? Welcome to Creative QA Talk. So before starting the QA talk, I would like to give you a brief introduction about creative software. As most of you know that creative software is the leading company in Sri Lankan software industry. So we mainly focus on building and managing dedicated teams of developers and testers, and provide project-based software development and maintenance services to our clients. Also, we are Microsoft Gold partners and provide cloud solutions and services as well. If I talk about QA talk series, from QA side, we have been conducting this series. Today's session is going to present by Piumika. She is a QA engineer in our company. After the presentation and demo, there will be a time. I'm getting a feedback from someone. Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah. After the presentation and demo, there will be a time slot to ask questions and get clarifications. Also, feel free to use chat window to ask your questions. Please turn off your microphone during this presentation unless you have something to ask or something to share with the audience. Yeah, Piumika, you can start the presentation if you are ready.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, all. Hope you can hear me. Today I'm going to discuss about Playwright, which is a newly introduced and trending cross-browser automation tool used for end-to-end testing. We are going to focus on following aspects. First, we'll get to know what Playwright is. Then I'll go through the benefits of using Playwright for test automation. And then we'll have a look into the core concepts of Playwright of Java with some example demonstrations. Finally, we'll get to know existing alternatives for Playwright and also some limitations of the tool. Playwright is a Microsoft's newest addition to the testing frameworks, and its first release was in January 2020, quite a new tool. It's an open source Node.js based framework. We can automate our cross-browser end-to-end test scenarios easily with the help of this tool. Playwright is compatible with Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. It can be integrated with major CI/CD servers such as Jenkins and Azure. And it also supports multiple programming languages, including Python, Java, and C#. It supports Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit browsers. And it supports both headless and headed browser modes for these three types of browsers. And Playwright currently does not support real mobile devices. It uses device emulation to automate tests in mobile web browsers. Among the multiple different tools available for end-to-end testing, there are many options to choose from. How can one know which tools are popular and trendy and which tools are actively maintained? So we have a report based on a study published on the first quarter of 2021. It's an analysis of end-to-end testing tools and libraries. It can answer our questions. This report analyzes test automation tools based on their many metrics. Let's look at some popularity metrics. When considering GitHub stars as a popularity metric, Puppeteer It's the most starred project as per this report. Cyprus goes second. The newcomer, which we are talking about today, which is just a 1-year-old project, goes third. That's not the best part. When looking at the relative growth, Playwright becomes the leader. It grew by 16% in the first quarter of 2021. So it's fair to say that Playwright is a trending tool. Let's have a quick look at the advantages of using Playwright and why Playwright has become a trending tool. As I mentioned before, Playwright has full API coverage for the modern browsers such as Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. And it enables fast and reliable execution. Let's see how. When we are automating tests for web pages, we encounter multiple types of elements such as links, buttons, images, radio buttons, and so on. In test automation, you surely have seen scenarios where an error occurs because of inability to find the element because it has not been visible yet or it might not have been enabled yet. So to overcome such issues, we might have to set waiting times for tests. But Playwright has an auto wait feature which performs a range of checks on elements before making actions. This can simplify our testing. For example, for a button click, Playwright checks whether the element is attached to the document object model, whether the element is visible and whether this element is stable and whether it is enabled, editable, and so on. So these checks might differ based on actions. There is a list of all possible actions and associated checks in the Playwright website. You can refer to them for further information. And Playwright supports isolation between tests with the use of a concept called browser contexts, so that we will not need to worry about having multiple test sessions at once without interfering with each other. And most of the time, Playwright works with user-facing strings such as text content and labels to select elements. So it's very user friendly, and today we discuss some of those element selectors as well. To the next point, Playwright is considered as an out of process automation driver. That's because it does not limit its scope into an in-page test execution. It can automate scenarios with multiple domains, multiple pages, and pop-ups as well. Playwright introduces powerful network control with APIs. We can track, modify, and handle any request via Playwright scripts. And also Playwright supports modern web components like geolocation and user permissions. We can test a web application from IPs of various graphical locations, and we can do testing based on user permissions using Playwright. And last point, last but not the least point, Playwright has the capability to cover a vast range of test scenarios, including file downloads and uploads, all the native input methods, and even light dark modes of web browsers. And before discussing the core concepts of Playwright in a detailed way, let's see how to install Playwright into our machine and how to start working. Now you already know Playwright supports many programming languages. Today, for demonstration purposes, I selected Java. We need Java 8 or a newer version for this. And we can either work with Windows, Mac OS, or Ubuntu. And I am proceeding with Ubuntu. Playwright for Java is distributed as a set of Maven modules. So the easiest way to use it is to add the Playwright dependency to our project's POM XML file. And also we will need the dependency for JUnit. So we have to add the JUnit dependency as well. It's not a must to add JUnit dependency, but when accessing some features, we will need it. You can find the latest versions of Playwright dependencies in the Playwright website. And after adding these two dependencies, everything is ready to proceed with Playwright. Let's see how to start with our first test. I am using a website of an online shopping store to perform our tests. As first test, I'm going to navigate to this website. So let's see how we can do it. Here I have added the two dependencies we need to the POM.xml file, and I have created a class named first test. And the first thing we have to do is importing Playwright support for our test class. For that, we have to do this import, and we can write our test within this method. And also we can annotate this method with JUnit test annotation to consider that as a test. Then we have to create a Playwright instance. We do a Playwright create to create a Playwright instance, and then we create a browser instance. Here you can select the browser you want to run tests on, whether it's Chromium, Firefox or WebKit. For now, I'm selecting Chromium. And then we have to launch the browser. Next thing we have to do is create a new page within that browser. By browser.newpage, and then we can open the page and navigate to the URL we need to locate. For that, I am adding the website which I showed you before. And finally, we have to close the page and the browser. This is the very basic test script we can have. Let's see what happens when we execute this test. You can see that the process is finished successfully, but we didn't see a browser. That's because by default, browsers are running in headless mode in Playwright tests. As you may know, in headless mode, a web browser is running without a graphical user interface. So by running tests in headless modes, we can save the processing power and the performance of our tests. But if we want to see the browser when running tests, we can set headless to false. Then the graphical user interface will open and we can run our tests in headed mode. We can set headed mode in here by creating a new browser type, and as launch options we can set headless to false. Then our test will run in headed mode. So let's run the tests and see. Yes, now we saw a browser. But still, if we feel like we need to run our tests more slower, that's where we need the slow motion option. We can set slow motion in here as another launch option. We can set slow motion and give a time in milliseconds. Then our tests run a bit slower than before. Yes. Now you can see our tests become more slow. And also having the ability to take screenshots is one of the basic requirements covered by a test automation tool. So in order to take a screenshot, we have to add a single line of code wherever we need with the path to save the screenshot. Let's say we need to have a screenshot within this repository. We do a page.screenshot and we create a new page.screenshot options, and we can set a path by paths.get. In here, we have to provide the path which we need to save the screenshot and with the name which we need to save the screenshot. Now when we run this test, we will have a screenshot of the navigated web page in the path we provided. In the test results, screenshots, and example1.png. But when running a test, setting to take screenshots whenever and wherever we need is not the best practice. So with Playwright's new edition, they have introduced an option called tracing. For each action, it records the screen and as a set of screenshots. So we can go through each and every step with the screenshots with the Playwright's new edition. And now again, I'm going to talk a bit more about the core concepts of Playwright for Java before proceeding with some other tests. First, we have the browser concepts. It can be an instance of Chromium, Firefox, or WebKit. As we saw before, we have to launch a browser before every test, and we have to close the browser after every test. And then we have browser contexts and pages. A browser context is an isolated session, incognito-like session within a browser instance. Normally, it's recommended to write tests in this different separate browser contexts. So then browser state is isolated between the tests. We can have a new browser context like this. We have to just do a browser.new context to create a new incognito browser context. And within the browser context, we can create pages. Page is a single tab or a window within the browser context. We can create a page within the browser context with the context.new page, and then after all the tests we need to run, we can close and dispose our context. Let's see the difference between the same scenario with and without browser contexts. In here, first I'll show you what I'm going to test. In this website, I'm going to log in, and then again without a browser context, I'm going to open a home page, and also I'm going to do a login, and with a browser context, I'm going to open a home page. Let's see what's the difference between those. This is the test I have written for the scenario. Just for now, ignore all these selectors I have used here to perform the login action. We'll look into those later. Just focus only on browser context. Here I have created two pages, page 1 and page 2, but still in the same browser context. So even though it's a new page, this is also opening in a same browser context as previous. And finally, I have an assertion to check that the user doesn't have to log in within the same browser context, even though it's a new page. That's a normal scenario, which is very similar to a scenario when we do what happened when we open a new tab within the same browser. Let's run the test and see. This web page has an issue with banners. Let me run the test again. Why is that? I think this web page has an issue with this banner, and this banner is not showing in the test window. That's the issue here.
Yeah, Piumika, try killing the browser and running the test.
Okay. Okay, it worked. Now you can see a new page was opened in the same browser context. Our test passed. That means the already logged in user doesn't need to log in again when we are in the same browser context. But let's see what happens when we have two browser contexts. Here I'm creating a new browser context. And using that browser context, I'm opening the new page. Then our assertion should be assert should not equal the logout. That means when we are in a different browser context, our user have to log in again. Let's see whether it's running properly now. No. Yes. Here you can see after login, a new incognito session has opened and user will have to log in again. That's why our test passed. I hope you understand what's the difference when we have a browser context and when we don't have a browser context. Now let's look at some selectors. Selectors are strings which point to the elements of a web page. They are used to perform actions on the elements of the web page, actions such as click action, fill action, and so on. There are text selectors, CSS selectors, Xpath selectors, and many more selectors used in Playwright. We'll talk about few selectors. Text selector locates elements that contain the parsed text. It has a few variations. Its default matching is case insensitive, so it doesn't care about the case of the text we pass, and also it searches for substrings. That means if we have a text selector for log, it searches for all occurrences of log, including login. But if we want to search for exact content, we can use single or double quotes to mention the search string. As an example, if we quote log, it only matches an element with text log. It doesn't match with an element with text login. And this text matching always normalizes white spaces. For example, it turns multiple spaces into one, ignores leading and trailing white spaces. Let's see how to locate elements by text selectors. I'm going to write our login scenario step by step now. In our previous test, we saw a login scenario, but we only focused on browser context. So now we are focusing on element selectors and some input methods too. Now we know to the point of page navigation, and so I continue from there onwards. After navigating to this website, the first thing we have to do is click on the login button. Then first let's create a selector. For that we have to do a page.click, and we have to add the text selector for that. You can see there is the login button is called login, so we can use that text as our selector. And also we know that text selectors are case insensitive. We can even pass this text in toggle case. It doesn't matter. And also, since text selectors are search for substrings, we can keep this as log. Still, it is still searches for login. And since these selectors normalize white spaces, we can have some spaces too. And then what we have to do is click on the text boxes and input the our username and password. For that, we have to do a page.click on the input. We have to take the input from the website. So let's go to the website and we can use its name as the input. So we give name equals log. We paste the name, and we have to click on this button. What did I do? Then then we have to do a page click on the same input. We can use the same input, and we can do a page fill by giving the same input locator and providing the username or the email address we want to input. Then again we have to do a page click and page fill for the password. Let's take the element selector, login password. And let's give the password as the parameter. This is how we do page clicks, page fills in Playwright, similar to other automation tools. And finally, we have to click on the button login. For that, we'll need the locator of this. We can get the element locator of this and paste it in here. Now when we run our test, a login scenario should pass. Let's run the test and see whether our banner bothers us anymore. Did we do something wrong? The page. Okay. Our test passed without considering the case of the test string or without the considering the white spaces of our test string. And we have few more things to know about selectors. We have CSS selectors with us to see. So we have CSS selectors. In there, normally we use IDs, class names, attribute values as CSS selectors to identify elements of the web page. And Playwright enhances the standard CSS selectors in two ways: CSS Engine and custom pseudo classes. CSS Engine uses document object model structure or the document element structure of the web page, and custom pseudo classes are options we use to identify a state of an element or to identify elements that contain other elements. Before selecting an element, we need to check whether the element is visible. For that, we can use this visible equals true condition. And as an example, if we consider a web page which has two buttons with the same name, let's say that the first is invisible and the second is visible. If we don't use the visible option, the test will wait for the first button to become visible, since that's the first button in our document object model order. Probably a timeout will occur after waiting for some time. But if we use this visible equals true option with our selector, our tests will skip the invisible button and find the correct one. We have another CSS select option. We can select elements which contain other elements. For this, we can use has pseudo class. It turns an element. It returns an element if any of the selectors passed with parameters matches the elements of web page. Let's say we have a web page with an HTML block like this. In here, as you can see, there are two articles, each containing div classes named test1 and test2, and each div class has a paragraph element. What if we want to search for a text content within the div class named test2? We can use the has option. Page.textContent searches for the text content of the element which is passed as parameters. Here I need to search for an article which has a div class called named test2. So it points to this. And also we have another conditional selector. We can use is pseudo class to say match an element for either any of the parameters passed with our element identifier. For that, we can, for an example, let's say we have a button in a web page. We are not very sure about the button text. It might be, let's say it might be login sometimes, but it might be changed to sign in sometimes. That will be an issue when we automate tests. We can use this is function to address the issue. According to this line of code, this test performs a button click if the button has text login or if the button has text sign in. And also Playwright can select elements based on the layout as well. Let's see how it can be applied. So in this login page, there are input boxes to enter username and password. If we want to select the text box for the text box which is right to the text password, we can write a selector like this. We can select the input box which is right to the text password, and also we can pass a parameter as a value to fill the password text box by giving a page.fill command. And similar to other test automation tools, Playwright also uses Xpath selectors to select elements. And we have another selector, Nth element selector. This matches the elements based on its position in the DOM order. Let's say we have a lot of elements in similar name. Nth element selector is 0 and 1 based selector. If we if we give any command, let's say a page click with the element identifier name, if we give nth equals 0, it clicks the first button which matches our argument. And also if we give nth equal 1, it matches the last element which matches our argument. And then we have Nth Match Selector. In the previous slide, we talked about the Nth element selector, and it has a limitation. It only allowed us to select either first or last matching element. In a scenario where we need to select an element which is not first or last among multiple elements, this Nth Match Selector comes to the rescue. Unlike the previous Nth element selector, we can pass any number for this Nth match selector. Let's say a scenario which have 3 buttons in the same name. If we pass the button identifier with number 2 to the Nth match selector, it matches the second button in the document object order. And also this is very useful when we want to wait until specified number of elements appear in the web page. If we want our test to wait for all these test 1 buttons to appear, we can write that like this. This asks to the page to wait for the selector test1 which has 3 elements in the same name. There are a lot of element selectors which are common with other test automation tools. We talked about a very few among them. And then we have input methods. Playwright supports automating all types of inputs, including text inputs, select options, mouse clicks, and uploads, and many more. And text input is the easiest way to fill out form fields. Let's see. We saw the text input, how the text input works in our login scenario. So let's see how some other input methods like checkboxes and mouse clicks works with Playwright. For that, I have a test. In there, I'm going to use a website, a dummy website, which has all our required elements. I'm going to click on a radio button and select some option from the list, and then we can match multiple select elements as well, and maybe we can hover over check mouse hover. And since the time goes fast, I will quickly do it. We can do a page dot click and give the ID of the radio button we want to check. Here, and page dot click. Then we can assert with the state of the button using the ID of the button and check whether our button is checked. We can check whether our button is checked by using the button ID and page1.isChecked command. And like that, we can use a command called select options to check whether select a item from a drop-down list. For that, we do a page1.select options, and we provide the element identifier and the value we need to check. Likewise, we can use this page.clicks to do checked radio buttons and checkboxes, and we can use isCheck to check the state of those radio buttons and checkboxes, and we can use select option to select from drop down list. And also in a select option, we can give a string array to select multiple options. The same command, we just have to give the element identifier, and as an array, we have to provide what elements we need to test, we need to select. So by running this, we can see it checks on the it's too fast. Anyway, the test passed means it checked on the radio button. Our assertion was true, and likewise we can perform this actions using different input methods. And we talked about input methods for a little while, so I have a example for a download as well. I think we can for downloads we have to set accept download tests in our browser context to be downloads to be activated. For that, we have to introduce a new browser context option and set accept downloads to true. And then we can create an instance of download. And we can wait for the download. The download will be performed by a page.click, and we have to give the button we click to download the file or anything. And finally, we can save our downloaded file in a path we need by providing a required path with a name to save the downloaded file. So by running this test, in here, a file will be downloaded from the website I provided here. Yes, you can see a text file has downloaded. For that also I used a dummy website. And now we have to talk a bit about device emulation. At the introduction, I mentioned that we can emulate the browser for different contexts. In this Playwright context, we can override environment settings of the browser, and in other words, we can do browse emulation. This includes viewport size, that means changing the size of the browser window on our screen, and we can set time zones for our tests, and we can change the color scheme of the browser to light or dark theme, and we also can also check test web pages based on different geolocations based on their coordinates. I have a written test for viewport testing. For that, to set a viewport size, we have to just this is a normal navigation test, you already know. To set the viewport size, I have created a browser context, and as browser context options, I have given the command set viewport size and given a width and height for the website. This is the width and height of a full screen website. And also, when creating pages, this first page is in our browser context, so the viewport size is applicable for that. And our second page is also in the same context, but we can customize the viewport size of the page as well. In here, I have set the viewport size, a very small one for our second page. Then when we run this test, our first browser page will be opened in full screen, and our second one, this is the first page, and our second page will be opened in a very small viewport size. Yeah, this is the second one. Similarly, we can check for time zones, geolocations, and all these emulation aspects by changing the parameters. And now I am going to look at the Playwright Inspector. This is very similar to Selenium IDE. This automatically converts the actions we perform on a web browser to a Playwright script file. This allows us to easily create tests by just recording our own actions. We have to give this one command with the URL we need to test. Then it records everything. So in this terminal, let's for this I'm going to open a page in Wikipedia. We can see a Wikipedia page open and a Playwright Inspector has initiated. So we can perform actions here. And then every action we do is correctly recorded. Then we can copy and paste this code to our to any of our classes, and when we rerun this, we will need to do a browser close manually, and when we run this test, we can see our actions have properly recorded. We searched for Sri Lanka, we clicked on an hyperlink. Yeah, all those actions are properly recorded. So we can use this Playwright Inspector similar to Selenium IDE. And now we are going to talk about how Playwright overcomes its most concerning limitation, its report generation. Playwright is still evolving, and for now, Playwright doesn't have an inbuilt report generation method for Java. So we can integrate JUnit to get it done. For that, we need another plugin, Surefire plugin. We can add that into our POM XML file. First, we have to create a build node, and then we can find this Surefire login in the internet. We have to add this Surefire plugin within a build node. Then we can generate a report, which a very simple report, which is shown as this. When we give a maven test command in the terminal, we can see test results in a very basic structure like this. If you want more columns and some analysis, you can use the Maven Surefire report. Hopefully, Playwright will introduce their own inbuilt report generation soon for Java. Then we will not have to bother about this issue. And also, when working with these tests, we have some best practices. When working with JUnit, you already know it's a best practice to write test suite and tear down in a separate method, so that we don't need to have duplicate code. So here I have written a test suite setup annotated with JUnit annotations. For the suite setup, I have annotated with before all, and it includes what we have to do before all other test steps. So it includes creating a Playwright instance and creating a browser. Then we have suite tear down after all annotation, and it is what we do after all the tests. We can write a close browse option in here, and then before each test, it's as I told you before each test, that's the best practice to use a new browser context to isolate tests. So we can use browser context and page creation within the before each annotation, annotated by before each annotation, and then after each test scenario we can close the context, browser context, and then annotated by test annotation we can proceed with writing our tests. So and also this is a very good way to organize our simple tests, and also we can use page object model as well with Playwright to reduce code duplication and improve test maintenance. Uh, and also Playwright supports many more concepts and features, including multi-page scenarios, network handling, and as I said, when we are talking about the advantages of Playwright, we can integrate our Playwright test with CI/CD servers. For the time being, today I'm not going to discuss each and every one of those, but there is another one thing I want to show you. Playwright for Java is not thread safe. Only one thread calls Playwright at a given time, but it's okay to create multiple Playwright instances on its own threads. That means we can have multiple Playwright instances for different tests at once. Here's an example for that. I have already written the code, and in this, let me explain it. In the main method, uh, yeah, in the main method, I have given the browser three browsers available for the uh, playwright as strings, and uh, we have created a playwright thread for each browser, each one of these three browsers, and then this is a normal web page navigation test as we saw before. And here I have created a method to get browser type. So then we can call this method and get the browser type here. And we can assign a Chromium, WebKit or Firefox to here. So, and also here there is a line to take screenshots based on the browser name. So since I have used three browsers and three threads, when we run our test, we can see all three browsers, Firefox, Chromium and WebKit, gets opened and goes to the given URL. And we can see after the test becomes successful, in the given URL, the three screenshots for each browser has been created with the browser name. Yeah. So that's all about the concepts of Playwright for Java. So before winding up, let's see what are the existing alternatives for Playwright, or what are the competitors of Playwright. Puppeteer is a node library and it provides a high-level API to control Chrome and Chromium. If you can remember in the very first slides, we talked that the Puppeteer has the highest stars as per that report I quoted. And however, Microsoft has defined Playwright as an enhancement of Puppeteer. So probably Playwright has more features than this. And also there are a lot of alternative tools such as Selenium, Protractor, Stress Cafe, and so on. And each of these tool or each of this library has its own advantages and limitations. We discussed why Playwright is trending and when compared to others at the very beginning. While having many advantages, Playwright has some limitations as well. As we saw a little while ago, Playwright doesn't have an inbuilt reporting for Java. And its developers have announced that they are working on their own test runner. So hopefully we will be able to generate more analytical and more fancy test report with Playwright in near future. And Playwright is just 1.5 years old, so its APIs are evolving day by day. It has a long way to achieve more. And also, since it's an evolving tool, documentation and community is limited when compared to other test automation tools and frameworks. You can always refer to Playwright website and follow the examples to have deeper understanding. Not only Playwright for Java, it has relevant resources to learn Playwright with other languages such as C#, Python as well. That's about Playwright. Today we discuss mostly on the very basics of Playwright for Java. Yeah, if you have any questions, now feel free to ask.
Yeah, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, so Piumika, actually, thank you for this like detailed information. It seems it's a very good tool to try ourselves. And I have one question. Actually, what kind of attractive feature which is having with this tool? Because you told that it's less than 2 years lifetime is there. So
Yeah.
when it compares with other tools, that what kind of attractive features are there? So like competitive advantage, what is that? Do you have any idea?
Yeah. This browser context option is not handled by many of the available testing tools. So it's a main concern. And also this not for Playwright for Java, this Playwright for Java is still a bit behind than Playwright for Python and there are, as I told, there are many languages. For some languages, they have support for network control. Like it doesn't limit to the web browser when we can see the network tab when we inspect a browser. Uh, Even that extent into the network tab, also we can check the network statuses and to do some network related interactions. We can automate Playwright's tests. And also in some elements there are features like I discussed some features with CSS element selectors, and there are many more features keep in element selectors which are new to Playwright, which are not handled by other available tools. That's why it's become a popular tool.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we use the Playwright if our application is running in our mobile, in our web application running in our mobile?
For now, real device support is not supported in Playwright, we can emulate and do the testing.
Okay.
Any other questions? In Piumika's presentation, she mentioned that there are some competitors or alternatives to this tool. You may have some experience using other tools like, as I remember, Udara has some experience using Test Cafe. Again, this is that tool is a competitor to this tool. So, any feedback from you, Udara?
Yeah, Lakma. So now we have been using Test Cafe for more than 6 months, and we have identified some issues with Test Cafe also, like when we are running some test which uses custom JavaScripts created by our client. So those JavaScript tend to break because Test Cafe is using its own web driver kind of thing called Hammerhead, and it's we are kind of right now finding solutions for this. And apart from that, like Test Cafe has been like pretty smoothly working for us, and we have been able to like do many tests using Test Cafe. But it seems this Playwright thing also a direct competitor to Test Cafe. So yeah, I would like to personally try out and see how this Playwright thing work. It's a very interesting demo today from Piumika. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Any other feedback from others? Yeah. Thank you, Piumika, for this session. This is a really great presentation and demo.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you all for participating.
Thanks for all for participating in this event. So hopefully we will organize more QA talks in future. Yeah. Have a nice day. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
okay, bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you, Piumika. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.